As baseball continues to evolve, the way people look at the game changes, and that includes the way teams view how they should handle their own team. Like your normal leadoff hitter back then was a guy like Luis Ariz, guys who had a good batting average with very little power, but they could hit for contact and get on base for the more powerful guys in the lineup to drive in. In 2025, your prototypical leadoff hitter is someone who hits 50 home runs, like Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge. Like it's become the norm now to take really what used to be your prototypical cleanup hitters and bat them lead off. So that's just one of many examples how the game's changed in philosophy. But another one that's become clear, especially this offseason, that I found interesting is the devaluing of first base by pretty much every team in baseball. For the longest time, teams wanted a set first baseman or really a set player for every position. And most positions still have their set players for the most part. But first base, it's changed a lot. And again, with what we've seen specifically with how this offseason's been playing out, teams have stopped caring about first base. And as a result, because of what looks to be such a quickly evolving philosophy on first base as a position, it's affecting certain players financially. Really quick, as always, if you're part of the 59% of viewers not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button if you enjoy the videos, as there are two first basemen available this offseason that are particularly good. And I'm going to use each of them as the prime example. First is Pete Alonso, who's available via free agency, and then Tristan Casas, who the Red Sox have been making available via a trade. I'm not going to straight up say these are the two best first basemen in baseball because, well, that would be wrong, but they're definitely up there for sure, and they're available. Pete Alonso has proven himself as one of the most powerful bats in baseball, and he's been doing it on a consistent level since his rookie year, so for 6 seasons now. And Casas is less proven because of the fact he's only a couple of years removed from his rookie year and was hurt like 80% of last year and what was supposed to be his second full season. But the simple fact that he was a high draft pick combined with what he's shown to be capable of at the big league level so far, he's also definitely up there for first baseman. Yet despite these guys having the value they bring, nobody seems to want them. Like, the demand is not at all high for Pete Alonso and the contract he's looking for, and the same seemingly goes for Tristan Casas' trade value. A lot of first basemen have actually been signed and moved around this offseason, but it's not because it's a valuable position and teams are rushing to get the best first baseman possible. No. All the first basemen getting signed or traded have been just like, all right, whatever, type of cheap deals. Cleveland did trade away Josh Naylor to the D-backs, which is a pretty big deal, but Naylor's cheap and still a year away from free agency. So for Cleveland, who do you replace him with? Pete Alonso, one of the most powerful hitters in baseball? No. How about bringing back 39-year-old Carlos Santana on a 1-year deal? Not that Cleveland spends money anyway, first base or any base, but that happened. Then you have the Washington Nationals, who needed a first baseman, so they got 2 first basemen, Josh Bell and Nathaniel Lowe. Josh Bell being via a 1-year, $6 million deal, and Lowe via a trade. He doesn't become a free agent until after 2026. He's not making dirt cheap, but he's not making anything crazy either. 2 very affordable players. But Cleveland and Washington are more small market. I mean, Cleveland definitely, and Washington isn't necessarily in a state to be spending that much, so those can make sense. I mean, if you just looked at those teams, you'd maybe think it's not first base specifically. That's the issue. But then you look at the Yankees, a team that signed Max Fried for $218 million, took on Cody Bellinger's expensive short-term contract from the Cubs. I mean, it's the Yankees. They're obviously no small market. And before the offseason, I predicted Pete Alonso to the Yankees because Soto would go to the Mets. And Soto, of course, ended up with the Mets. And with the Yankees needing a first baseman, it all lined up, until it was reported the Yankees didn't care for Alonso and preferred a cheaper option for first base, settling with your local high school history teacher on a 1-year deal worth $12.5 million. Oh wait, that's Paul Goldschmidt, but you get the point. Christian Walker's gotten the biggest deal of them all for first baseman with $60 million over 3 years from Houston, but that seems like the absolute most any team is willing to go to sign a first baseman. Pete Alonso, heading into his age 30 season, is naturally looking to get his big contract, but nobody wants to give it to him. I already talked about the Yankees having no issue going with a cheap aging history Paul Goldschmidt over Alonso. Well, now look at the Mets, the least cheap team in baseball, who just gave out the biggest contract ever in the history of ever. They don't even care to give Pete Alonso what he's looking for, and they already had him. He was their guy. They offered him a 3-year deal with multiple opt-outs worth $90 million, which is obviously not close to what he's after. And then over in Boston, the Red Sox have been trying to trade Tristan Casas, and the one trade proposal we know of was him going to Seattle in exchange for Luis Castillo, but Masataka Yoshida in his contract would also be going to Seattle in the deal, but they declined. The Red Sox seem very desperate to get his $18.5 million over the next 3 seasons seasons off the books, and in fact are so desperate that they're willing to attach one of the most promising youngest players in a trade just to get that contract off the books. Think about all this. Cleveland would rather get a guy who likely is about to play his final season. The Washington Nationals would rather sign 2 cheap first basemen rather than 1 expensive one. The New York Yankees had no problem in the world to go cheap at first base. The Mets aren't even seemingly interested in giving Pete Alonso anywhere near what he's looking for and prefer to stay short term with him. And now the Red Sox are willing to give up one of their best promising young players in a salary dump trade, at least partially. That's what that trade would have been if the Mariners accepted it. And this is all happening in an offseason where money doesn't seem too hard to come by for the best players on the market. But when it comes to the first base position, clearly teams could care less about getting what in years past would be looked at as the clear best option for the position. So what the hell is going on? Well, I think a lot of it is like I was just talking about, the change in philosophy with how teams are viewing the first base position. Something that's only becoming more popular in baseball is the amount of versatility you have on a team. Like it used to be, if there was a utility guy, there was like one of them and he would just play everywhere, but most guys were set in their positions. But now there's a lot of utility guys on every team. The Dodgers have been doing this for years, having so many players on their team, no matter how good they are, switch around and play multiple positions. You know, usually the star of a team plays one position and one position only, and the cheaper utility guys play multiple positions. But with the Dodgers, if you look at a lot of the players they've had and where they've played on the field over the last 10 years, you see a lot of that. Max Muncy has played both corner and infield positions. Kike Hernandez has played pretty much everywhere in the infield and outfield. Same with Chris Taylor. Now they have Tommy Edman who does the same thing, but it's not just your typical utility guys. It's the stars too. Cody Bellinger, when he was in LA, played both outfield and first base. Mookie Betts has played right field, second base, and shortstop, and they even plan for him to be shortstop again this year. Again, this is the Dodgers. Obviously, it's a smart thing that they've been doing, and it works. I mean, they've been able to have a very flexible roster with how they play the field on any given day. And a lot of teams see the value in doing this because, well, I mean, how can you not at this point? First base has always been a position that was never that premier to begin with from a defensive standpoint. I mean, think about it. Every player theoretically can be plucked at first base if you need them to. Like, you can't just pluck any player you want at shortstop or catcher or third or the outfield necessarily either. But first base has always been that position where if you kind of run out of places for an unathletic player or hurt player or whatever to play, you just put him there. Oh, this guy hits well but sucks defensively, put him at first base. Oh, this guy is hurt, so we don't want him playing the outfield anymore, but his bat is still valuable, put him at first base. Oh, this guy is terminally ill with stage 4 cancer, put him at first base, he'll be fine. That really is just how it's become as a position. It's not really valued as having one set guy there for a long period of time. Sometimes I do feel like teams probably use that sort of way of thinking a little too extreme because, yeah, first base may not be where you need the best defender on your team, but you still need competent defense there. And sometimes these guys don't even have that. And again, you'd rather have a great shortstop than a great first baseman. But if your first baseman is really that bad, it could still cause issues. But I understand the philosophy. It's not as valuable of a position defensively. And you can mix and match and pluck different guys there throughout the season on a team. And it works. I mean, that's how they're looking at it now. The way the teams are looking at this position is like, okay, well, we don't really need a designated first baseman. We can move guys around depending on the matchups, who's pitching against us that day, if we want more righties or lefties in the lineup, stuff like that. And even if these teams do have a designated first baseman, there's no need to pay top dollar for one. And when you have guys like Pete Alonso or Tristan Casas, neither who are very valuable defensively, as their defense has no reason as to why they're valuable at all, it's really just their hitting, I can understand why a lot of teams just wouldn't care to have them, or definitely wouldn't care to pay a lot or give up a lot for them. And again, with Casas and the Red Sox, we only know about the Mariners situation, but I'm sure there's a lot more we don't know about from a public perspective. But what it all shows is that I think the demand for Casas isn't as high as the Red Sox probably thought it would be, even though they themselves don't seem to value him enough either. Why else would they be willing to basically lose him in what's partly a salary dump? So the demand just seems incredibly low for first baseman, as teams are much more comfortable getting both a cheaper or more versatile option for first rather than giving up anything valuable for one. Because if you trade a lot to get Casas or take on someone else's unattractive contract to get him, or pay a free agent like Pete Alonso and have him on your field, you can't be as defensively savvy because first base is the only position that those guys can play. Whereas if you have a more athletic first baseman, he can also play third base or maybe outfield if need be, and you just have a lot more to work with. Not that teams wouldn't take a player like Pete Alonso, but it's also the fact that even if you don't have versatility coming from your first base position, you'd rather just be cheap with that position rather than pay a lot for someone who can't play anywhere else. I mean, the Washington Nationals got two guys who can't play anywhere else on the field, but they're also on very short-term, cheap contracts, so it's a lot different than running it out there with a 7-year deal worth over $200 million, or whatever Pete Alonso and Scott Boras are looking for. If your first baseman can hit really well, of course that helps the lack of defensive versatility. But when you have to pay them a lot of money, I think that's where a lot of teams are deciding, yeah, we don't care to do that. If they're not going to have a good defensive athletic option at first, these teams are perfectly seeming to be okay with having a little weaker hitting, but still good enough and much, much cheaper and less of a commitment like the Nationals and really every team that's signed a first baseman this offseason for cheaper deals. Or they'd rather have weaker hitting but much better flexibility with the defense. And because of all this, players like Pete Alonso seem kind of screwed if they ever want a big contract, because clearly baseball still values giving big contracts to most positions. We've seen starting pitchers get a lot of money this offseason. Willie Adames, a shortstop, got a lot of money. Outfielders will always get a lot of money as long as they hit well, like Juan Soto. I mean, that guy honestly plays horrible defense, if we're being real. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell, but because he hits so well, teams are willing to give him the greatest contract of all time. And then Teoscar Hernandez going back to the Dodgers. Like, those guys are fine, but baseball just doesn't care to go big with the first baseman like they used to. Scott Boras has been using Prince Fielder's big 9-year contract he signed with the Tigers years ago as a comparison to what he thinks Alonso should get, but that's just not realistic anymore in today's game with the way these teams are evaluating how they want to build their rosters. Teams just don't care about first base as much anymore. At least that's the way things have been going this offseason. And if you look at a lot of the way these teams are built, it really just does seem that way. So money does seem scarce for that position. It's an interesting trend and just overall thing I've noticed around baseball this offseason especially, and I hope I did a decent job of summing it up. If I did an awful job, well, hats off to you for watching this long. Let me know your thoughts on everything, and thank you for watching.